I've got the privilege of speaking on the book of Esther, which is an amazing book. But before we do that, I'm going to show you a slide of something that's very close to my heart. Food. No. In particular, buffet food, okay? Now, stay with me now. I find little bits of food very exciting, like a little sausage or a little sausage roll or a little pot of olives. It's so much more exciting to me than just kind of a sit-down meal. I love the kind of whole grazing table kind of vibe that we get going. I went to a wedding a few weeks ago, and there was this most amazing grazing table. I was like, oh my goodness. And even Aria, my daughter, who's just like me, said, wow. And I went, I know. But I love cheese. I just love cheese, but I love olives. I love just nice bread. And if I have an important job to do, if I've ever got like a really important task to do, like I'm a teacher and I have to write school reports every year, and it's a long job, I will get some little snacks, just something little, but I have like a little pot of olives on the side, and it just gets me through. So I love food, and I love having a little meal or having a little snack before I do something important. And I loved reading the book of Esther because they have so many banquets. Every time they have to make an important decision, I was like, oh my goodness, they've had another banquet. Sometimes they even have 2 banquets in a row. And I thought, this is brilliant. I'm going to enjoy unpacking this story because before they do anything, they have a meal. So I don't know whether you're like me, but as we read the story now, you might spot some banquets. And I like to think of them as a big grazing table. So we're going to look at the story. As Mike said, we're going through 39 journeys towards Jesus. I have the privilege of looking at the book of Esther. So we're going to have the story, and it's going to come up on the screen behind me. I'm quite a visual learner, and I like to sort of see the story unfold. So I've made kind of a series of little pictures, and they're out there on the table for you to take home later as well, if you're like me and you just like to see the story in pictures. So we're going to delve straight into the story. We're then going to find the son, Jesus, and then we're going to find some truth that we can take out into our lives. So find the story. The story of Esther's incredible. Now, as I go, guys, if you think I've mentioned the next bit, just click on and we're going to see the story unfold. Thanks, Becky. You're amazing. So the story starts with a man called a king called King Xerxes. I think I've said that right. King Xerxes. And we're in the city of Persia, in the city of Susa in Persia, and it's the 3rd year of this king's reign. And wait for it, he decided to hold a big banquet for all his nobles and officials. And wait for this, it lasted 180 years. Wow, that would be a good buffet, wouldn't it? Now, during this time, the king displayed his vast wealth. Everything was made of gold, and he was just displaying his wealth for everyone to see. Now, when this was over, the king held, you've guessed it, a banquet. This time, just lasting 7 days. That's not really a banquet, is it? But moving on to the next slide, this is where we're introduced to the queen, and she was called Queen Vashti. Now, she was also holding her own banquet for the women. But on the 7th day, when the king had drunk, I think it's fair to say, quite a lot of royal wine, he asked for the queen to come and see him. But she refused to come. And the king was mad. So she wouldn't come, he was mad. And he issued a royal decree that Queen Vashti should never again enter his presence. So the king set out to search for a new queen. He'd had enough of Queen Vashti, and he was going to look for a new queen. So the search was on. Now this is where we meet Esther. Esther was a young orphan girl. Her parents had died, and she was being looked after by her cousin Mordecai. And the king asked for all the beautiful people, all the beautiful young women specifically, to come and see him. And Esther was one of those that came. Esther caught the king's eye almost straight away. But going on to the next slide, Mordecai advised Esther, please don't tell the king you're Jewish. Don't let him know about your identity. And there's lots of background stuff towards that. But right now, let's just keep the fact that you're Jewish kind of under wraps. Let's not tell the king. So she took his advice. She didn't say anything about her Jewish identity. And Esther was chosen to be the king, to be the new queen, by the king. She was number one. She was chosen. And you'll never guess what they did? They had a big banquet to celebrate. They had some more food. But it was during that banquet, and we'll have the next slide, thanks, Becca, that Mordecai found himself sitting by a gate. And he overheard two of the king's officers saying they were planning on killing the king. So Mordecai told Esther what he had heard. Esther went straight to the king and told him about the plot to kill him. And she gave all the credit to Mordecai. She said, this is Mordecai. He heard about this. So the two officials were killed on poles, and it was recorded in a special book, and we'll see that again later. Now, this is where we meet a man called Haman. The king gave him a seat of honor, and everybody had to bow down to him. However, Mordecai refused. He said, I'm not bowing down to Haman. So Haman was furious. So again, we've got two kind of times already, haven't we, where someone hasn't bowed down to someone and it's made the other person mad. That's a theme we'll see running through this book quite a lot. Haman knew that Mordecai was a Jew, so he came up with a plan to destroy not only Mordecai, but all of the Jews. If I was telling this story to kids, this is where I'd now go, oh no, but I'm not, so I'll just carry on. So a decree was issued to destroy the Jews, and Mordecai was devastated, and so were the Jews. Now, Mordecai went back to the gate and spoke to somebody there, and he told him about Haman's plan, and he asked him to tell Esther so she could beg the king to change his decree and save the Jews. So that man went to tell Esther, but she said, I can't go to see the king. If I go into his presence, he might kill me. When Mordecai heard Esther's response, he spoke to this man again and said, and this is really quite a famous line, if Esther stays silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will come from another place, but you and your father's family will die. And then Mordecai said these amazing, quite famous, well-known words that you might have heard before. He said, and who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. So Esther said, okay, but you've guessed it. We need to have, we haven't got a banquet. We're actually doing the opposite. She had a fast. She fasted for food for 3 days. She said, can you join me? Can we have a fast? Let's do that for 3 days, and then I will go to the king. And if I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. So the people had a 3-day fast, and on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes, and she went to see the king. What do you want to ask me? The king said. So Esther said, come to a banquet first and bring Haman too. At the end of the banquet, the king said, Esther, what's your request? And Esther said, and this is unbelievable, just come to one more banquet and then I'll tell you. I mean, I would have been loving life if I was there. So many good snacks. But as Haman left, Mordecai refused to bow down. Again, we've had that theme before, haven't we? Which made Haman mad. So Haman, in his anger, set up a tall pole and planned that Mordecai would be killed on it. Now that night, the king couldn't sleep, so he began to read a big book. And we mentioned that earlier. There was a big book that things were recorded in. And when Mordecai had warned the king about the plot to kill him, he'd written that down. That had been written down in that book. And you never guess what page he turned to when he couldn't sleep. It was that page that reminded him of kind of the goodness of Mordecai, really, that he had saved his life. We must honor Mordecai, the king realized. So Mordecai was honored. Haman was furious. But it was time for the second of these banquets that were planned. And towards the end of the banquet, the king said, Esther, come on now. What is your request? We've had 2 banquets. What is it? What do you want to ask me? And she said, can you save my people? I'm a Jew. We're going to be destroyed. And the king said, who's responsible for this? And Esther said, it's Haman. Haman was obviously terrified because it didn't look good for him, did it? It didn't look good for him. The king left in rage. And the pole, and this is unbelievable, the pole that had been set up, I've got a big sort of stick here that we're going to use later, but the pole that had been put up for Mordecai to die on by Haman was actually the way that Haman died. The pole was for someone else by him, but it was actually Haman who died on it. So Haman was killed. Esther and Mordecai were given favor by the king, and a new law was written that the Jews in every city would have the right to protect themselves and to destroy and kill anybody who might attack them. Wow. So it was a time of glorious celebration for the Jews. And that's the story of Esther. Now let's find Jesus the Son in this story. Let's find Jesus, because the Old Testament points towards Jesus, doesn't it? Now, I want to start in chapter 9, verse 1. And it says this: on this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. But now the tables were turned. The Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. And I like to look in different translations, and the NLT puts it like this: but quite the opposite happened. See, the way this story started is not the way it ended. The Jews were headed for destruction, weren't they? Their story was not looking good. But God, the hidden hand of God, because God's not mentioned in this book. His name is never, ever, ever mentioned. But I think his goodness and his provision and his character and his love, they run all the way through the story. There are so many coincidences in this story that the world, like non-Christians, would say, oh, that's funny. But as we look at the story and we know our God, we think, wow, God was there all along. And so he turned a situation out completely around till the opposite happened. You know, that's the same as the big story of Jesus, isn't it? The people wanted to kill Jesus. They put him on a cross. They said, you're finished. This is over. Jesus said, it's just starting. Because when I die, it's going to bring life that the world has never seen before. The opposite happened. The people who wanted to kill Jesus, that said, you're going to die on a cross and that'll be the end of you. Actually, it was just the beginning. And another thing I loved when I was reading this story is in chapter 5, verse 1. We're going to turn there now or look on the screen, because it has a really interesting detail in it that as I was in a coffee shop the other day, and I was just, someone had aria for a couple of hours, and I had a bit of peace and quiet. And I was just reading the story to myself, and I noticed this little word that changed everything for me, because it says here, on the third day, and this is relating to the third day after the fast. So they've fasted for 3 days, and then on the third day, the fast is finishing off, and Esther's going to, right, it's time now for Esther to go and make a real difference and speak to the king. And I love the fact that that happened on the third day. On the third day, after looking to God, after fasting food, after looking to him, she got up and she put on her royal robes and she went. She did something. She made her way to the king to start that journey of telling him that she wanted to plead for her people, the Jews, and not let them be destroyed. And obviously, that shows us, doesn't it, that just like in the Easter events, it was the third day when everything changed too. See, Jesus was dead, and he was in the tomb. And that was seemingly it. And yet on the third day, he got up, and he changed everything. And I love the fact that this happened on the third day. God is a God of reversal. How things start is not how things need to end. And you might have a situation in your life right now today that doesn't look good. God is a God who can turn it completely around. And I also want to look at the pole as well, because as we mentioned earlier, I've got a big stick here, and this just symbolizes the pole that was set out by Haman for Mordecai to die on. This was meant for Mordecai. This was meant for Mordecai to die on. Who ended up dying on it? Haman, the man who put the pole there in the first place. It was Haman, wasn't it? And you know, when we think about the cross, which is not too dissimilar from the shape of this pole, what did the people who hated Jesus want? They wanted Jesus to die. They wanted him gone. But yet, and I'm going to make this into a cross now if I can remember how to do it. Let's see. Here we go. Oops. Look at that. That was meant for death, wasn't it? But it didn't just bring a little bit of life. I'm going to just toss it to one side. Because it brought life. It brought life for every person that would ever live in this world. It brought life. What was meant to destroy Jesus, hope, joy, goodness, salvation, it did exactly the opposite. It brought fresh hope, fresh life, fresh goodness, salvation, forgiveness. See, what Esther did, she was willing to die for her people, wasn't she? She was willing to die for her family, her people, the Jews. She didn't end up dying, but she was willing to do that. You know, Jesus, he didn't just die for a group of people or his family. He died for you, for me, and every single person out there in Swansea and in the world. He died for everyone, and he did die, and he did rise. Esther shows us a little glimpse of what Jesus did. But, you know, Jesus is so much greater than any person that could ever walk this earth, isn't he? Our God is a God of reversals. Remember that today. He is faithful to keep his promises, to deliver his people. It was true in the time of Esther, and it's true in your circumstance today. Now, find the word. That was a word for us, but I've got a couple more for us to take home with today. God is always at work, even when we don't see it. The whole way through this story, even though we don't read the word God, as I mentioned earlier, there are so many little moments. Like, why couldn't the king sleep on that particular night? Why did he turn to that page in the book? Like, some people would say, oh, that's just a coincidence. But as the people of God, we know, don't we? Actually, that's God. That's God at work. He hasn't forgotten me. He remembers me. He's at work. Can you trace God's hand at work in your life behind the scenes? Is Ali here today? No. Oh, Ali, you're there. When I was in Ali's life group, I thought about this yesterday. I know you told me once about how, like, God's been so faithful in your jobs over the years. Like, when you came to Wales and you needed a job, like, you just kept meeting the right people at the right times. And it was God, wasn't it? And I think we could all recall something, couldn't we, in our lives where we think, you know what, God put me there. And he had his hand on me. And next slide, and this is really important. God has positioned you for a purpose. Esther was in a royal position. She found herself there through all sorts of different circumstances and many, many dinners. But she found herself in a position of real power, and she could really make a difference. And I absolutely loved what Rox and Wendy said this morning. Wendy said, it doesn't matter who your mum is. It doesn't matter who your dad is. It doesn't matter if you have a job. Wow. So God isn't looking for any status. Like in this story, there was so much concentration on status and power and bowing down. God's not interested in that. He looks at all of us, and as Rox said, can't do it all, can we? I can't be Liz tomorrow in her work, and you can't be me in my work. We're all needed. You might have a job. You might not have a job. You might be at home. You might be in a coffee shop. You might, I don't know what you are and where you are, but God has placed you there for a beautiful purpose, for a wonderful plan. I just want to tell you a really quick story because this has helped me so much in my life, and then we're gonna sort of tie everything up. One day a few years ago, I've got a daughter. I adopted her. She's now 6. Many of you know her. She's beautiful. But as with children, there are tricky times, aren't there, as well as the lovely ones. And my daughter is strong-willed. She is strong-willed, and if I was writing a report, she is full of character. Read into that what you want. But she is a delight. Honestly, she is a delight. She makes me laugh every single second of every single day. You can't take her anywhere, but she makes me laugh. However, when this is about 3 years ago, we were having quite a tricky time because she'd just started nursery at school. And it was a bit of a shock to the system for her because she was sort of thinking, oh, I want to do whatever I want, wherever I want, whenever I want. And she was getting used to the ideas there are some rules in this world and other children as well. And it had been a really difficult time to be fair. It was nearly Christmas. Emotions were high. And I'd had a meeting with the Elenco at school, which is just someone who looks after kind of if there's any additional needs or if a child maybe a bit emotional or whatever. And I had a meeting with this Elenco. She's lovely. She's my friend. She's my colleague. If she's watching this, I love you. But it was hard for me to hear what she was saying to me because she was telling me some things that were really difficult. I was realizing that my daughter, who I love so much, was really struggling in a school environment. And I was really upset, actually, and I remember this so clearly. Things have improved a bit since then, but at the time, it was very hard. And it was lunchtime, thankfully, so I didn't have to teach any children for the next hour. So I had 1 hour to have a cry, pull myself together, have a coffee, and go back in. And I did just that. I drove to Greg's. Any other sandwich shops are good? If it's going on the internet. We love all sandwich shops. But I drove to Greg's, which is just around the corner from my school. I got a coffee. I sat in my car, and I did have a good cry. I've got to admit, I had a really, really good, messy cry. And I said, God, I don't know if I'm up for this. I don't know if I'm equipped. I don't know if this girl who's so wonderful but has so many needs almost, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I've got the skills. I don't know if I'm cut out for it. And as I looked up, Greg's is just to the right of that photo. And this shop isn't there anymore, but it was there at the time. And it's a German company. Is Alex here? Yes. It's a German company. And although it doesn't actually mean what we're going to talk about now as such, it's a German company, and it's got an umlaut in it. And an umlaut is 2 dots. And it makes like an sound, doesn't it, Alex? I'm very nervous with you there. Anyway, I looked up, and bang, the Holy Spirit said to me so clearly that I have never forgotten it. He said, you understood that umlaut, didn't you? He said, you understood there were 2 dots there, and you know what sound that makes, don't you? And then I looked at the word, and it looks quite similar, doesn't it, to the word worth. It's actually not, but just ignore that for the analogy, okay? Because the Holy Spirit knew that I didn't really know what that word meant. It's very similar to the word worth. And the Holy Spirit said this to me, Becky, you are exactly the person who is going to champion this little girl's worth. You understand her worth more than anybody else. There is no one else who is going to raise this little girl other than you because I have called you to it. I've called you to raise this little girl, and you are going to know her worth. You're going to see it. You're going to see it when other people don't. You're going to see it when the behavior is not showing it. You're going to know it. You're going to champion it. You're going to nurture it. And you know what? I have to tell you, I have remembered this every single day since. On the good days, but the really horrible ones as well. I have literally remembered. I've got this photo on my phone of this shop that's no longer there, but I've still got the photo, and I have remembered it every single day. Because God has positioned me for such a time as raising this beautiful little girl. It's my job. I'm going to be the best at it because he's called me for it. And I just want to encourage you, wherever it is, wherever you find yourself right now. I could say so much more. I've got loads of notes here. I'm not going to say much more other than this. Wherever you are, whoever your mum is, whoever your dad is, whether you've got a job, as Wendy said, or whether you don't have a job. You can't do it all, as Rox encouraged us. You can't be everyone. I can't go to Liz's work. I can't go to Simon's work. I can't rush around and try and be everything to everyone, but I can go to my school tomorrow and be the person that's needed. We are positioned for such a time as this.